different types of automation that is available. Let me see. Can I start this? Really quickly, we share. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So last week we talked about different types of automations that are available. Um, just as a form of an overview, uh we have the cloud flows, right? And we said some we have the cloud flows and we have the desktop flows, right? So those are two broad categories where they are. And the cloud flows basically um they or let me start from desktop flows. Desktop flows is you automating stuff on a computer, on a physical machine, while cloud flows is you are automating stuff on the cloud. And you know what I mean by cloud, right? So different services like databases, maybe stuff like email, all those things are in the cloud. You access them through the web. So you can automate stuff on the cloud, or you can automate stuff on your computer, and that with desktop flows. And that comes into play. I think I gave an example last week where, in some organizations, they have like a physical database somewhere underground in a dark room. And for you to get data out, somebody has to be on that computer to click the buttons and get the data out. But if you want to use that data in the cloud, and you still want to keep that, maybe you can't even, there's no API or there's no way of getting that database to the cloud. Well, you can build a desktop flow, and once you trigger the flow, the automation will run and simulate the activities of somebody as if somebody is clicking the buttons, opening the applications, and perform that operation. So get the data. Once the you can set up the automation to get the data and maybe upload it to a folder or something like that is maybe synced to the cloud, and you get that out that way. So you kind of think of desktop automation where it's not possible to perform those things on the cloud. And in some cases, it's not even that it's not possible, it's just that it's expensive. Some services, to use their APIs, they're going to charge you a whole lot of money. Meanwhile, you could just click the buttons and get the data. So in such a case, it might now become a business discussion that, okay, rather than actually going to you know, purchase the APIs. We could build a desktop flow that simulates a user clicking the action, and you're able to get away with the license or API limitations in that way. So yeah, but typically, if it's possible to do it in the cloud, then there's no point doing it on the desktop. And the desktop comes in two ways also. There's a dedicated course for desktop flows anyway. That's the RPA, that's PL 500, I think. So it's dedicated for desktop flows. So when it comes to desktop flows, right, you want to use it as your last case if you can't do it in the cloud. That's when you start thinking of desktop flows. And I'm trying not to talk too much about desktop flows, but I also want to make you aware of it, right? So within desktop flows, there are two categories also. There is the attended and the unattended. So just by the word attended means somebody is there. So if I'm running a desktop flow on my physical computer, um, I can run it in an attended mode. And that means that somebody is there, maybe to click some buttons, or it is on a physical computer. When it comes to unattended mode, that allows you to run your desktop flows in a VM, in a virtual machine. So, you know, the idea of desktop flows is it needs to be on a computer. But because of the cloud and cloud services, you can actually have a computer in the cloud, right? So maybe you want to scale your operations with using desktop flows. You can have several servers in the cloud performing those operations. So in that sense, it's not a cloud flow because it's still running on a physical machine, or it's still running on a machine, but it's just a case that the machine is in the cloud this time around. So that's a way you can scale your desktop flow operations even to the cloud. Do we have any questions on that?
No.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Me
I
no.
do.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
this part about scaling the desktop flow. I got it a bit roughly because
Yeah.
I was a bit distracted. Can you please come again with that one?
Yes. So there are times. So I gave that example of, maybe you want to get what's it called? You want to get some data out of a database that doesn't have API, right? And somebody needs to click on the buttons to get the data out of maybe the application was built in 1998 and there was no API then, and it's business critical and they cannot change it, right? But you still want to leverage that kind of data within the Power Platform. So you can have your desktop flow, click all those buttons, fine. But you know, when something is in the cloud, you get the advantage of scalability, right? But if something is on your physical computer, that means you can only run one operation at a time. Do you understand what I mean? So, say it's an application on my computer, I can only open the application once, get the data out. So, say I want to perform the operation a million times. That will mean, maybe I want to do it a million times an hour. That would not be possible to do on my computer because it needs to open the application, click the buttons, get it out, do it again, do it over and over again. As much as it's an automation, but there is still the limitation of it being a single physical computer. So that's where the question of scalability comes in. How can you scale your desktop flow automations? So you can scale it by, rather than doing it on a physical computer, it can now be on virtual machines. Virtual machines are basically computer. If you've done maybe Azure or all this GCP stuff before, once you're trying to register, they'll tell you, do you want a Windows computer? Do you want a Linux computer? What RAM size do you want? All those kind of things. So you basically configure a kind of like a real computer, but you're not seeing it physically. It's in Microsoft server somewhere underwater, right? But it's actually a physical computer somewhere, but you are just accessing it through the cloud. So with that, you can scale it. So that operation you wanted to perform a million times an hour, rather than trying to do everything on a single computer, you can now break it up and say each computer do 100, right? And you scale it across several virtual machines. So do you get the context? So that's how you can scale desktop flow automations. Else, you're just gonna have a single computer and you probably run the computer to the ground.
Yeah, it makes sense. But in that case, does that now mean that the physical computer will have to now be redundant? So whatever function you are doing on that physical computer will be taken up by the cloud computer now.
Yes, so that's a way you can do it. Another way is your physical computer could still be one of them. But the difference between attended and unattended mode, that's where we started the conversation, is when you are in the attended mode, somebody has to be signed into that computer. So it uses like a user section. But if you're doing it in unattended, you don't have to physically sign into a computer with your account. Everything will be handled by the VMs. So if you are trying to do stuff on your physical computer, you'll be fine with doing attended mode. But once you're thinking of scaling, you'll start thinking of doing stuff in unattended mode.
All right, brilliant.
Okay, cool. So that's desktop flow side of things, right? But really, in this course, we'll be talking more about the cloud flow side of things. And we said the different types of cloud flows. We have the scheduled flow, which allows you to run based on a schedule. So you can define when you want it to start, how often you want it to run, and it's just going to do that consistently over time. We have instant flows, which can be triggered manually. And last week we saw some examples of this too. So basically, you want something to happen when you click a button, or say you have a Power App and you want to launch an automation when somebody clicks a button in the Power App. You'll be using a manually triggered flow in that case. And this is an example we are going to go through today, and we'll start seeing how we can connect these different automations together to do stuff. So that's an instant flow. We have an automated flow, which allows you to to trigger. So a flow basically has triggers, and it has a trigger and series of actions, right? So a trigger is what makes the flow start. So in a scheduled flow, your schedule is what makes it start, right? In an instant flow, a user action, clicking a button, makes it start. In an automated cloud flow, you have different options depending on the connector you're using. Um, you have different options of what can trigger it. So this is an example we see on the screen here for the SharePoint connector. And you see you can trigger the flow when an item is created, or when a file is created, or when a file is deleted. So you can use all those things as trigger conditions. So we right now we're going to talk about some best practices. Shortly, we'll go into the interface, and we're just going to see, first of all, we're going to see some things. So earlier today, Farouk was showing, he had questions around copying and pasting. So we'll just look around the interface, and we would see the functionalities, what you can do, how do you search for stuff, how do you get things out. So that's what we're going to do next. So, but firstly, talking about naming conventions. Now, when you add an action, it's going to come with like a default name. It's a good idea for you to rename it to something more contextual to what you're trying to achieve. And I'll show you some things that we do in that way, just to have a form of a naming convention. And the good things about conventions, it makes other people able to understand what you've done, right? It makes it easy. It makes it document. It now becomes like a self documentation. As much as in tech world, we like to do documentation for stuff, but there's also the concept about making your work self-documenting, right? So basically, someone should be able to look at your flow and figure out what it's doing without having to open another external documentation. So I'll show you different things on the interface to make that possible. So there's the concept of dynamic data or dynamic content when you are working with automations. And the idea of that, which I talked about last week, is in Power Automate, you can have series of actions, right? So maybe when an item is created, send an email. So the first action is when an item is created, that's the trigger. The next thing is send an email. But if I say send an email, how do I know? Maybe I want to send an email to who created the item on SharePoint. But how do I know who created it? That's where dynamic data comes in. So every action that you add has dynamic data, which is data that you can get from that action. So for example, the trigger when an item is created, or let's see, in this case, there's a list roles action, list accounts actions, right? And that list account action, you see, we're able to see account name, city, blah, blah, blah. So what all this stuff that shows up in the dynamic content, we can pass it to the next action. And I think that's where the name flow comes from, right? Because some data from the steps above, it can flow into steps beneath. We'll see this where we start moving around the interface. But that's the idea of dynamic content. We also have conditions, and not just conditions, we also have switches. Has anybody worked in a programming language before where you have switch, where you use switch as a function before? So if you've done Java, even I think Python even has switch also.
Nope.
Okay.
I haven't used switch.
Yeah, so switch is just like if else statements. Let me see, is there a good way for me to let me bring Notepad? I think I do a lot of sticky notes, so yeah, but hold on, it's going to jump out. So let me take this out of the screen. I use sticky notes too much. I think lately I've seen OneNote is a better idea, but I'm not used to that yet. So let's illustrate switch. I'm just doing this because it's kind of like a programming concept, which is going to be useful some way, somehow. So before we talk about switch, let's talk about if else. So in many programming languages, there's if else statements. Have you used if else statement before in any programming
Yeah,
language? Okay. What programming language?
Python and R.
Okay, cool. So the idea of if else is basically the condition, right? So if let me just write it in this format. And this is the Power Apps format anyway, so we're kind of doing Power Effects. So I can say, and you can do that on the variable. So I can say if var gender equals male, right? We can say notify you are a boy. Then so in Power FX, the way you do the else, you don't type else, you just put a comma and you go to the next condition. So you say if gender equals male, notify you are a boy, then you go to the next condition. We say if gender equals female, notify you are a girl. Then you can even do like a final else. And you can say notify
Non-binary.
no comments. Okay. So now this is a variable, right? So if the value in the variable is male, and maybe we've put this in the select of a button, right? If the value of that variable is male, it's going to say you're a boy. If the value of that variable is female, it's going to say you're a girl. And if none of these things are true, it's going to say no comment, right? So this is if else, which is quite is good enough, right? But you can still take this, you can write this another way to get the same result using switch. So now yes, there's a switch function in Power FX. So we're still fine. So another way you can write this is switch on vargender. Then switch now has cases. So in some programming languages, you will see it called switch case. So We are saying switch on Vagenda, right? Vagenda is the variable. Then what cases are we trying to test? So we can say case male, then we have notify you are a boy, case female, notify you are a girl, then the final one, the else. And in case, I think this is called default. So default is if the variable doesn't match any of the cases, then we have no comment, right? So this is a way you can do the same thing you've done with this if else. You can do it also with a switch. So switch is also like you use it to check for conditions, but you see the way it's written is a bit different. We've almost used less words than the if else. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. I've,
So yeah, go on.
is it that? So now with this if and switch, you
Yeah.
know, with if you can keep going with your conditions, you can have more than three
Yes.
parameters.
Yes.
But with
Yes.
switch, is it only three parameters? Because you
No,
mentioned
you can
something
have
about
as many
multiples.
also. But the reason why switch is preferred in some cases is now in programming generally, right? You might find yourself having to do nested if statements. So there are sometimes you're checking for some conditions and you have nesting. So that's like an if within an if within an if.
Mm.
In some cases, rather than do that, you can use a switch and it gives you a cleaner way of writing the code. I think Power Apps helps in the sense that you can just keep on typing comma and just adding the extra conditions. Some programming languages are not like that, and depending on what you're doing, you might have to nest the if statement. You can still nest if you want. I do nest, but it's not the best in terms of performance. So it's good to know that this too is possible. I know a lot of people are familiar with if else, but not a lot of people are familiar with switch. That's why I've gone through this detail because I feel like it's going to be useful somewhere, somehow. And I've done a couple of automations where I've used a switch rather than if else, right? Because even within Power Automate, you type less because you just on the switch action you provide a variable and you can just put as many cases as you like. But if you're doing if else, because if else is either a yes or a no. So I'll maybe we will simulate this in Power Automate and you will see what I mean, why you want to get used to using switch sometimes. And
Yeah.
okay.
I actually remember coming across this in Power BI now that
Oh,
you have
okay.
gone into detail with it, but I didn't really understand it. The way I've explained it makes it clearer.
That's good then. Yeah, because I know even beyond the Power Automate world is a programming concept, so you will surely find it somewhere. That's why kind of talked about that. And once we get into Power Automate and we touch that, it will make a little bit more sense. Okay, so yeah, so we use all of those kind of things, the conditions, switch, to have conditional logic. You can also have variables, and you can set your variables to different types. So you can have Boolean variables, integers, float, string, object, array. So you can have variables. Don't go too crazy with your variables because every action in Power Automate is like say you have a flow with 100 steps and a flow with one step. In terms of your usage, the flow with 100 steps is going to use more of your capacity, as much as the capacity is a whole lot. But it's still good to know that a flow with 100 steps is going to use more of your capacity than a flow with one step. So you always, when you are designing, especially when you're designing a flow that will be used very frequently across many users, right? You don't want to go too crazy with steps. Variables are one of the steps that are more expensive too. So in some cases, there are ways of not creating a variable. In some cases, you even use a compose. I think where was I talking about compose? I'm having a feeling it was in this class. Did I talk about compose last week and said, it's like a sheet of paper?
Yeah, you did. Was this class? Was last week?
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So yes, I said compose is just like a sheet of paper where you can put stuff. Um, and that's kind of what we do sometimes. Sometimes instead of creating a variable, you just put it in a compose. Compose is actually less expensive than setting a variable, because for setting a variable, you have to initialize the variable. That's one action. You have to set the variable. That's two actions. And in some cases, depending on what you're doing, you may want to do that, right? But in some cases, if you just need to refer to something later on, you can just put it in a compose, and that's just one action, and you can refer to it whenever you want. So that's a bit more advanced, to be fair, but it's good to know that, don't go too crazy. So in some cases, rather than using a condition action, you will type it in an expression. So because expression is like you're typing code. So rather than using an actual condition action, you will type it as an expression. So that has already saved you, a couple of actions, which will help the performance of your flows and also the license usage. Cool. Or the capacity usage, because it might not be licensed per se, but it's still capacity usage, as much as there's a high limit, but you still want to design things for scalability. All right. So yes, we have variables, and you can have variables of different types. You can have loops also. Apply to each is a way you can have loops. So maybe I get a list of accounts, as you can see on the screen. And for every account, I want to do something. Maybe I want to get the, or maybe I want to send an email to all the accounts, right? So I can say for every account, send an email to the email address you find. And, it goes and it does that in a loop. When working with loops, there's a setting you can have on apply to which called concurrency. So concurrency is a way that you can have multi. So rather than a loop is going to go one at a time, right? So rather than going one at a time, you can set it to go 20 at a time. So maybe you have a large list, maybe like 1,000 items you want to go through in the loop. So you don't want it to wait for each other. You want to process as many as you want as possible. So you can turn on the concurrency. There's a limit, I think maybe 20 or 50. So, but rather than going one at a time, you can go 20 at a time or 50 at a time. So that will also help your performance a little bit. But one thing to note, if you do that, is don't you can't use variables within that loop. So if you have concurrency turned on, do not set variables within that loop, because it's going to get messed up. And it kind of makes sense, because instead of going one at a time, you're going 20 at a time. So it's trying to set the same variable 20 times. So that's just all going to get messed up. And very recently, there was a piece I did at my place of work that literally that was the project. Some guys have designed the flow and they've set variables within the loop. And well, they didn't know that that was an issue, right? And they just saw that things were just getting mixed up with no clear explanation. And basically, our work piece was to go there and just sort it out for them. It was like a lift and shift job, but it's one of those kind of projects, one of those kind of jobs that at the end of the day, it's kind of simple to do, but You are not paying for how simple it is, you are paying for the knowledge. So so that's one thing to watch out for. It's not obvious, you won't necessarily see a clear documentation that says that, but that's one of the things you find with experience, and you're getting that, just easily right now. So that's something to note. Be wary of certain variables within apply to each if you have concurrency turned on. If concurrency is off, that's fine. It's going to go one at a time, so there won't be any clash. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right, cool. So another type of loop that we have also is a do until loop. So a do until, so unlike a regular loop, right? So this one is going to, as part of what you're going to be supplying to this apply to each is like an array. So you supply it an array and it's going to loop through the whole array, right? But a do until is quite similar, but it's going to continue looping until a certain condition is met. And what we tend to do in this kind of cases, so if you look at this path, it says initialize variable task completed false, right? And we said loop until task complete is equal to true. So how does this play out? So somewhere within here, we are checking. So, and this actually kind of makes sense. So maybe you have two different flows, right? One is running, but while this one is running, you don't want it to continue until that other flow has completed, right? So you have two different flows running. They're doing two different things, but flow A is dependent on flow B completing. So you can do a do until and say, okay, do until task completed is true. So flow A will run. Once it gets here, it's just going to continue looping. And that thing we tend to do is you tend to set a delay. So you can set a delay of maybe 2 minutes, right? So it waits for 2 minutes, it checks, is task completed true? If not, it loops again and it does that and does that. Once flow B is completed, flow B updates task completed column to true. At that point, when flow A runs, it's going to see the condition is true and, it's going to stop this loop. So, yeah, I don't use it every day, but there are some cases I believe I've used it at least once. So there are some times you would want to use it, especially when you try to have some more advanced functionality. All right. We will see a couple of these things also once we get on the interface. I understand we've not had any break so far. So can we go have like a 15 minutes break and we resume 11:45? Is that okay?
All right.
Okay.
Level what's
45.
okay. All right, thank
All
you.
right. Okay. Oh, is my math wrong?
No, no, no,
I
no, no,
think it's
no.
correct.
Perfect,
Okay.
perfect.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Cheers. Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so we're talking about loops, right? So that's a do until. Now, error handling too is another very important concept, because you want to know when things are going wrong, and unsurprisingly, things go wrong a whole lot, when when dealing with automation. So, say you're trying to automate with, or you're trying to integrate with, maybe Salesforce. What happens if Salesforce is having a downtime, a global downtime? And we've seen that happen before, right? So, when you're working on automation, you want to try to make it as fail safe as possible, and that's where error handling comes into play. So, um to handle errors, like one of the simpler concepts which you should always use is this configure run after. So this configure run after, basically what happens is it's kind of like an if else for your actions. So basically you're saying you want a particular thing to run if it is successful. By default is successful. So once you add a new action, the default is configure run after is successful. So but what happens if it fails? You can configure something to happen if it fails, right? So that's the concept you should always have. I'll show you an example once we get on the interface. But you see we have these different options. We have is successful. So if that action is successful, it goes. If you can say if it has failed, it goes. If it is skipped, it goes. If it has timed out, it goes. So you have these different options for your error handling. So that's like the basic error handling that you should always have, and we'll see where that comes into play. Another concept is parallel branches. And you see over here in the screen, they say error handling, because that's one way you do it. So you could have an action. So see this analyze image, right? You could have a branch that says, if it is successful, initialize the tag variable. Then you could add another parallel branch that says, if this fails, terminate the flow, right? Or send an email to the developer. So basically, as the thing is flowing from the top, depending on what happens. So without putting a condition, because a condition will not catch that, is this configure run after that is like the condition, right? So you can implement that on the different branches, and that will determine where it goes depending on if this step passes or fails. So let's go on the interface, and start looking at some of these things. I'm going to drag my screen into view. So make dot power automate. And so if I come to create, let us use, and we could use anyone anyway, but let's just use an instance to keep it simple. So manually triggered flow and click on create. Okay. So we've run this flow. This flow is starting. Let us add a record to something. So let's search for SharePoint. So we have connectors, right? I believe we've talked about connectors before. Connectors are different services you can connect to, and there's like a very big list of them. So let's say SharePoint. I should have some SharePoint, right? So if we say SharePoint, let's say create item. And let's go look for the SharePoint list. So let us use maybe this one. Just a random SharePoint list on my side. And the list name, let's just say companies, right? So we want to create an item on this company's list, and let's navigate to the list and see what's there right now. So I think we said license key request sites and companies. Okay, so this is what we have here right now. Company name, company ID. All right. And we can see those columns here, company name, company ID. So say I want to add a new column, a new company, some enterprises, and company ID. Let me just say 123. Okay. Title, I don't think is required. We're not using it, so I'll leave that alone. So now what we're saying about naming. So now it just says create item. Anybody that comes to this flow doesn't know what item is created. What are we even doing? So there's no context there. What we can create, what we can change this to is we can say, and one way I've seen somebody do this is you can keep the original name so they know what you selected at first. So I can say create item, then maybe just do like dash companies. Right. So I know I'm creating a company item at this point. You can always rephrase it anyhow you like. But in some cases, it's good to know because here we see the logo. But if I change this to something else, they won't easily know that, say let me come back to SharePoint to see what I mean. So for SharePoint, you can see we have many actions. So if we rename this totally, and I can rename this to list folder, anybody that comes there will not know that what I selected initially was create an item, right? So in terms of best practice, it's kind of good to keep this original name, sort of, and just add the context of what you are doing. So in this case, I'm creating item, and the items I'm creating is companies. So that's fine. So let's say after this guy, we want to send an email. So let's say send an email with Outlook, and there should be send an email V2. So who are we sending the email to? So this is where dynamic content comes into play. So if I click on this, I think it's, so if I click over here, we see the gear icon that says use dynamic content, show suggest. That's a bit weird. But let's just come in here and say use dynamic content. Okay, now it shows the normal thing. Normally this is the default view, but I think it's just yeah, they're changing stuff. Okay, but anyways, we see these two options, right? Dynamic content or power effects, or not power effects anyway. So we can either use dynamic content or we can use an expression to determine what value is passed in here. So if we come into dynamic content, so this is what I was saying about every action having an output. So you see, we can select from any of the previous actions. So in this case, create item and manually trigger a flow. So if I come here, so let me come back here, use dynamic content. So say I want to send, so this manually trigger a flow, this is the first action. After that, we have create item, which is this second action, and we are able to get dynamic content from them. So maybe I want to send it to the person that triggered the flow. So I will go to manually trigger the flow, and you see we see user email. So in this case, this email will be sent to whoever triggered this flow, right? And I can just say the body of, so for the content, I come back to dynamic content, and maybe I want to say the company name. Company name has been successfully created. Let me just copy and paste that into the body. Right? And maybe we can now put created date. We can now say we can search for the created column, right, from the company. So this will tell us the time when this record was created, right? And that becomes the body of our email. So if I save this now and I click on test manually, we talked about manually and automatically last week, and I say manually and continue, run flow. Okay, it says email to should be string email, the runtime value. Okay, so this is what the flow picked up. Let's see, and we've said user email. So, okay, it's encoded. Let me see if there's any better option. Search for email. Okay, no, that's just it. So let's just use the created by email. So that would be the email of the person who has created the record, which is the current logged in user anyway.
What's
So
the what's the difference between the created email one and the manually trigger? So when we click the initial one, the manually trigger a flow user email saying the person that is creating the item obviously is the one that
yeah,
the stuff should be sent into. But what's the difference between the manually trigger one and the one from the SharePoint?
exactly. So this is where our sheet of paper comes into play. So because we don't know what it is, we've seen it failed. Why did it fail? We've selected user email. That should be the correct thing. So let's use our sheet of paper to figure out, what the values are. So I can come here and say the input for this guy, or to keep it simple, I can just say flow user email, and I can put a semicolon, no a semicolon, a colon. Then I can search for email again and put it here, right? Then I can say SharePoint created by email. And I can come here and search for email and put this here, right? So by the time we run this, and I can just use automatically so I don't have to perform the trigger action again. So by the time we run this, oh wow, we ran this time. Weird. Okay, yes, because now we've changed it to use the SharePoint email
Yeah.
instead. But you can see this is what comes out from the Flow user email, which is definitely not an email, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over here, this is the email of who
Okay.
created the record. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. I've always thought that was the actual email, but if you hover on it here, you
Yeah.
can see it says X user email encoded. So it's kind of encoded. So maybe you have to do some decoding. There's probably a way, because the flow knows who created it. That's why this one is correct. Do you get?
Mm-hmm.
But this is coming up encoded. That's why it looks that way. So at this point, I should have received an email.
You should even receive some email from me, Seth. I was testing your
Probably,
email.
I think so because I saw some delegate one stuff. I actually thought it was like because when I'm doing some training sessions, I just
Yeah.
set up automations and I never forget to turn them off. On my other computer, there was a time that I had a desktop automation and I
Yeah.
could be doing stuff on my computer and suddenly the thing just triggers and it hijacks my computer. And yeah, it took me a long time before I turned it off. So I thought it was one of those testing automations that
Can we
you
just
do.
one of them, please? I didn't know what it was going to look like, but I had
Oh,
to.
okay, so this is it. So I see air conditioner, new
Okay.
AC unit
Yeah.
priority.
All right.
This.
Okay.
So yeah, it looks like it's getting the actual dynamic data. Cool. So yeah, we see Sam Enterprises has been successfully created, blah, blah, blah. So I'll say Power Automate is kind of one of the easiest parts. While it sounds very technical, for most cases, it's it's about understanding the process you're trying to
Yeah.
automate. If you understand what the process is, you know what needs to happen one after the other. The actual connections is very simple. You're just choosing services, you're choosing dynamic content, and you're just deciding how
Um,
it flows. So
I
I'll
have a
say,
question.
yeah, Go on.
because I seem to enjoy it more than the canvas. I don't like canvas at all. But are there roles where specifically that like
Mm.
Power Automate roles where you SharePoint and Power Automate or they're all together Power Platform as a whole?
Well, I will say there are. So there are some people that are automation experts.
Hmm.
But I'll say if you're positioning yourself that way,
Yeah,
you are not just Power Automate at that point.
yeah,
So when it comes to desktop automation, so that's RPA. You know, I said RPA is a certification on its own.
yeah.
So you're gonna have to pick that up and be like an expert in that.
Ah,
Do you get? Then you will even want to go outside the Power Platform. So there's this other service, I can't remember the name now, but let me search for top automation. Should I say certification? I'll try. Because it's probably going to come up. Maybe even more than Power Automate. Um, maybe certification is the wrong one. Um, should I say RPA? I can't remember their actual names. But it's also a very good tool. They are the ones that UiPath. So yes, UiPath. You want to pick that up. So you're not just a Power Platform person at that point. You also know UiPath
okay.
because Power Automate and Microsoft stuff, yeah, it's getting better. But UiPath have been like the industry leaders before Microsoft got in the space. So Microsoft is kind of like the underdog in that in that world, if you get what I mean. And you know, obviously Microsoft leverages the relationship they have with companies already. But yeah, you get some use cases that UiPath is much better. So yes, there's automation as a role,
Okay.
but I'll say you just have to spread your wings a bit wider.
Hmm. Cool. All
Yeah.
right.
Cool
Figure
stuff.
it
Cool
out.
stuff.
Figure
Yeah.
everything out. Wow. Thanks.
Yeah. So let's talk about the send an email action because you'll be probably be doing this a lot. So for the send an email action, you have the actual view here, and you also have the code view, which is HTML. So this can be quite useful if you want to like do like an HTML table. Because if you look at these options, you can't really see table here, right? But you can literally come in here and do like HTML stuff. So table, um, close table, th, title, close th, and maybe td, item one, close td. TD. Oh, I didn't even put it here. Um, item two, close TD, close TR.
So we're doing HTML here.
Yeah, open TR. So there are use cases where you would need to deal with the HTML part of things. For example, maybe you're trying to put like an item link kind of thing. So maybe I can say, yeah, say A, close A, and here I can see
I have a question.
href equals, yeah,
So obviously this is a trigger the manual the instant flow, yeah. This one we
yeah,
created an instant flow. And we're saying if an item is created, you should send
yeah,
an email to the user or whoever created the item.
yeah.
So what's the difference between this one and an automatic flow? In the sense that automatic flow can also be automatic when an item is also created. Do you get what I mean?
Oh yes, yes. This is just an illustration.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is just we could have done an automatic flow. So the reason why I did this is just being a bit lazy. Because if it was an automated flow, I would have needed to come in here to add the record. And
Yeah,
that's what would trigger the flow.
that
So you
flow.
get. But in this case, I've added the record from here. So that saves me having to come to SharePoint to trigger something. Our item should have been here. Okay, there it is. Do you get? So that was why I just did it this way. So if I test this now with the HTML table, okay, I think I got it already. Well, I think it's my
Code.
yes, something's wrong somewhere. Oh yeah, I think I've not provided. This is yeah, okay, I know why. Because I have them all on the same TR. So this guy opened the TR here and TRTH, and this guy I'm supposed to close this TR. Open another TR. Then something was wrong here. TH TH AHREF. Well. T-body. Let me give that another try. We're not doing an HTML class anyway. And obviously we've got Copilot, so you could just paste it into Copilot and say,
Yeah,
fix this for me.
fix it sharp, sharp.
So let's see
Oh,
what comes out this
I tried
time.
also using Copilot and to create like a flow, and it actually creates everything for you.
Okay, that's the option they have over there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite nice. I've not tried it before because a lot of the use cases I do, they are not simple. So I would expect it to do a great job. Yeah, but that's that. So let's talk about the interface and some other things. So we were talking about error handling, yeah. So say I want something to happen. I want to get notified if this creating an item fails, right? So I can come in here and say, so how do you add a parallel branch? You do a right click on the plus and you see add a parallel branch. So I can click on this and it's asking me what do I want to be in the parallel branch. Let me just say send an email.
What's the parallel branch?
You'll see it now.
Okay.
So this is a parallel branch. So it's flowing, it's a flow, right? So it started from the top, it's flowing. And at this point, it actually flows in both ways right now, except I choose otherwise. So right now, if I click on, which probably I should even do, let me send it to, let me just say my own email address. Okay, so it's sending it to me and I'll just say something failed. So at this point, if I run this flow, it's going to proceed in both parts.
It's going to run the two actions.
Yes, because it's parallel.
It's going to send
So
two
you can
different.
say it's proceeding on both parts, right? And you can totally do that. So you see something failed and I still get this guy. You can totally do that if there's no dependency, right? If they are not dependent on each other. But in this case, we want to do like a form of error handling. So we want it to come to this part, this one that says something failed, only if this step fails. If it doesn't fail, we want it to proceed this way. So how can we do that? If you come here, if you click on the action, right, and you go to settings, you see run after. Yeah. Right now, the run after says if create item companies is successful. But we want it to run only if this guy fails. You can actually select multiple things. Yeah. But here I'm just going to come here and say select if it has failed. So if it has failed, that's when it's going to come into this path. And you can double check for this guy. If I click on this compose and I go to settings, we see it is going to run if this action is successful. Right. So that's how you can start putting some error handling. So basically, just like I mentioned in Power Apps side of things, right? You want to put error handling where you are interacting with something that could fail, right? Something that, might not be available at some point, blah, blah, blah. So let's test this now as it is. So if I test,
One, yeah. You didn't get
so you see it didn't come in here, right? Because it doesn't match that condition. So let's see, how can we get this to fail? Let me choose licenses, because licenses doesn't have these columns that we are passing, so it should probably fail now. Yeah, even though the automation is blocking us. Let's see if it's still going to allow us to test it. No, it's not letting us. So yeah, it's doing a good job. But now this is not a runtime error, right? So that's why it's fighting us so much. So I think company ID is expecting a number. So let's come back to the actual companies table, right? And let's type in a text. I hope, I suspect is expecting a text. Okay, it says enter a valid number. Seems to be fighting us, but we'll still trick it. We'll still get it to work. Okay, so let's do it this way. Let us, how can we trick it? How can we trick it? So it says enter a valid number. Anyway. Okay, I think I know what to do. So let us put a valid number. Is there a way to... Okay, I know a better idea. So when you're doing a manually triggered flow, you have the option to provide inputs, right? And you can provide different inputs. Okay, it's probably going to force us. Why are you so difficult to... But let's just talk about inputs, right? So maybe there's some information that you want to use in the flow, but that's only going to be available when the flow is being triggered. And this comes up when you're doing a manually triggered flow. So you can provide input. So in this case, maybe the company name, I want that to be provided, when the flow is being triggered. So I can say add an input. What's the type is a text, and I can just say company name. No, that's wrong. So I can type it here and just say company name, right? So if that is an input, remember dynamic content is available for previous stuff. So when I come to the company name here, I can just select that from dynamic content. And now we should see, so if I say see more, we should see company name. Can you see this here? The one we just created. So I can click that, and that comes into play. So if I click on save, so that's just like a topic on, getting dynamic inputs to your flow. So let's see how this does now. So if I say test and I say manual, now it's asking me for a company name, right? So I can say GB Lions and click on run flows. So now once that runs, because technically everything is still fine.
Mhm.
It doesn't go here, it comes in here. But if we check the company name now, we should see GB Lions, right? Which is the one we provided while running the flow. So that's quite useful. And obviously, if something failed here, it's going to trigger into this path. Do you have any questions?
So it's about the parallel one that we did, saying if something should fail when we're creating the item, we should send an email saying fail. Are we
Yeah.
able to use understand the concept of the parallel, understand why we're using that? Are we able to use why are we not using like a condition where true or false? That,
Well, because there's no condition we can check that against.
okay.
So what I thought of doing is if or will it be possible to remove myself? Let me see if I can add delegate one. Let me give delegate one full control. And maybe I can remove myself. Okay, it seems like I'm no longer there. So in this case, it seems, I hope, but I doubt. Because I created it, I'm sure I'm gonna always have some super access somewhere. Let's see, site access. Yeah, I think because I'm on, I'm gonna always have access. So that's not gonna restrict me the way I want. Yep, that's not working. All right, but what was your question? That is there any condition? No, we can't do this with condition because
Okay.
there's no condition to check against. If I come into edit and I say add a condition, let me try and do it here. And I say add a condition, right? And I say, you want to check if this one and this one. So there's really no condition. There's nothing like failed. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's no criteria that we can type into this place that would match into
Allow us
that.
this. Yeah, makes sense. Okay.
So you use the condition once you have actual criteria you want to compare against. But in this case, there's no criteria, and that's why we have the run after settings, which gives us that kind of condition that we can use to determine what happens if a step fails, if it is skipped, blah blah blah. Okay. I think next I want to show how you can call a flow from, or how you can call a manually triggered flow from a Canvas app. So if I come into apps, hopefully I have one app already somewhere that I can just open. So let's come into apps. Let me just open this one. I hope that's a Canvas app. Okay. So for this, I'm just going to open a blank screen. And to add a manually triggered flow, so the flows you can trigger from your Canvas app is they are manually triggered flows, right? So to add an automation, if I come to this more icon, I'm going to see Power Automate here. So I can click on that. And you have two options. You can create a new flow or you can add an existing flow. Now this is good. This is cool because it says I have no instant flows. Now, the reason why it's saying this is because this feedback form, I believe it's in a solution, right? And this flow I've created is not in that solution. So let's come to solution. So you see I have feedback from solution.
Yeah.
And over here, you see there are no flows, right? So it's good practice to always work from within a solution. So when you create your app, create it within a solution. When you create a flow, create it within a solution. That just makes sure things can connect properly and consistently. In this case, it's not a totally lost cause because we can come here and say add existing, automation, cloud flow. Then, did I even save this one at all? Just says button create item. Outside Dataverse, and we see it here, button create item. So I can just click on add. Okay. And now the flow is within the solution. Yep, there it is. So hopefully if I do a refresh now, it should show up. No, 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 no. So let's go back. I think they keep changing stuff. So let me save this, and I hope they've not changed this. I really hope they've not changed it. So let me come back into the app.
It's there. Okay, so
And let me make sure that's the actual app. Feedback from app. Yeah, you were saying something.
No. Sorry.
Oh wait, is this the actual app? No, it's probably not. It's the same name. I don't think this is the same app.
It's the same solution, same.
Well, the first one, I didn't open it from within the solution. So let me open this one from within the solution. Which is another thing to note. Once you have an app in a solution, try not to open it from, this apps page.
Yeah.
These apps here.
Yeah.
Try not to open it from here. Always try to open them from within the solution. It's weird, but it's actually a nice way to look at stuff. I think it's the same
It's the
one.
same.
But let's see if it changes. I hope they've not changed this. Guys are silly. So this is what I mean by I hope they've not changed this. Now, first off, is the flow on? Yes, it's on. So there's a trigger. But they've done this for Copilot, and I was really hoping they're not going to do this for anything else. So this guy says manually trigger a flow, right?
Yeah.
There's an actual action called when an app calls a flow. They are literally the same thing. So I hope they are not trying to mandate, because they've done this for Copilot before. If you want to trigger a flow from Copilot, you can use a manually triggered flow. It's going to work. But now you need to use when a Copilot calls a flow, which is a totally different. It's just like this one. This one is when a Power App calls a flow.
Yeah.
So it feels like that's what they're doing here, which is not nice, because what the other time when you could use like you could use manually triggered, right? That means that same flow, you can call it from an app. That same flow, you can call it from Copilot. That same flow, you can trigger it manually. It opens up more ways of using the flow. But now it seems they're trying to streamline it to just what the trigger says. I hope I hope that's not the case. Oh, that's the case.
Okay.
Oh, oh, this is so sad. I was literally with a colleague on Friday saying that no, they've not done that. That's not what they've done. Because yeah, for co-pilots, they've this is very sad. This is not nice at all. But I don't understand why they will do that. Anyways, never mind.
Microsoft.
I know it's very annoying because for the stuff we were doing, I think we now realize that we might have to duplicate the flow, have one trigger from Power App, the other one trigger from the Copilot, which is not ideal. We don't want to duplicate stuff. You want to try to use the same thing, but they messed it up. And they did it to the extent that you can't even call it child flow because we thought of, okay, well, if the triggers are different, what if we create a child flow?
Yeah.
And when the Copilot triggers, it calls the child flow. When the app triggers, it calls the same child flow.
Okay.
But they also restricted that you cannot call a manually triggered child flow from a Copilot flow, which is probably what they will have done for this guy. So that's not fun at all. But yeah, now we've added the flow to this app. So if I come to this screen, I can add a button, right? And now this button is in here. What I can do now is on the button, the name of this flow is button create item. That's not a good name, but you can see it says button create item dot run. And now it says company name. You remember that was the parameter that
Yeah.
we said the flow requires. So we need to pass that in to this flow, else it's just gonna, it says 0 argument received. Meanwhile, I expect 1. It's expecting the company name. So we can add our text input and say whatever was typed in here. So this guy.text should be our company name, right? So let me set this to default. Let me take this away. Okay. So I can come here and say new wine. I wonder why that came to head. So new wine and click on the button and that should do all the triggering, blah, blah, blah. I think I've gotten an email that says, oh, it didn't come through.
Can I see the
Have
formula
we
again
messed with that?
from PowerFX? Sorry.
Okay, 1 second. Let's see, did it create it? No, it didn't. Did we mess with the flow? So back to the PowerFX, it's just, all this is the name. If I had given it a better name
Yeah.
to be here, then dot run. So this is how you run the Power Automate
Yeah.
flows. So dot run, and if it requires a parameter, you pass it in here, right?
Yeah.
And that goes into the flow. So, but why hasn't it created those records? So let us see. So it comes in here. Oh yeah, I know why. Because we changed the trigger. So we have to come back here and put company name. It's so painful that they did that.
Is this the can we? I don't like this. Sorry. This
It
this old
switches
one.
around as it goes.
Yeah.
Funny enough, when this one came out, a lot of people didn't like it. I didn't like it too. But I think I'm getting used to it already. Because it just felt like, though when they released it at first, they didn't add all the features the old one had. So I was like, what's the point? I think they're doing better now. So let's see what the email that comes from this, because this one should actually know the email. Or it's not even sending it. It's not even sending it. All right, no worries. So we're gonna try that again. And it's quite nice now that you can edit the flows from within the app. Before you couldn't do that, you had to do it outside. Well, they've done it in such a way that you can edit it from within the app. So it kind of streamlines your experience. I think that's what they were trying to do. I told you about model-driven app too. Before it was you had to jump around, but they've streamlined everything to the single interface, which is good. Did anything happen? Okay, there it is.
Yeah.
And there's my email. All right. And you can also receive stuff back. So let's come to the flow. You can have an output. So let's say Power Automate, edit. So we're taking this guy as an input. You can also do something called a respond to a Power App or flow. Interestingly, this one still says Power App or flow. They might change this they might separate it out with the way they are going these days. So now I can send a response back. What data type is that going to be? Let me make it a date. And let's just get the created date. Right? And I can come here and search for created. So basically it's going to create the record, send the emails, and send back the created date. I can add multiple outputs if I want. And if I need that output, I can now come here and say, I can use a set. I can say set GBL date created to be this guy dot. So you can see that output property we just added. So if you have other output properties, you can get it out this way. So you can just say dot created date. And basically, once I click this button, it will run this guy, then get that created date and save it into this variable. So let me have another text that shows the variable value. Okay. So if I come here and click on this button, so it runs, something's happened. Error, blah, blah, blah. No response, blah, blah, blah. Not too sure, but it's good to have errors in training. Someone is at my...
Someone is at the video doorbell. 014Q.
Okay, give me a second. Someone's at my door.
No worries.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Oh, now this is quite interesting because I think like we got the failure we were looking for. Wait, did the flow actually fail? So I think it's the response. Oh, wait a minute. So the flow itself didn't fail. I think it's the response itself that failed. Which happens. I suspect the format the formats don't match. So let's just do something simpler then. Let's just say, let's see what's available. Okay, let's just use the ID, right? So let's just say SharePoint ID. So yeah, dates can be a pain in a lot of ways because of the formatting. I think the way SharePoint stores its date is different from the way Power Apps interprets dates. So they can be a pain to work with sometimes.
I have a question. So the way
Yeah.
to trigger a flow from a canvas is usually just through a button.
Is used from a canvas. It's usually through a user action. But it doesn't have to anything, you can trigger stuff. It doesn't have to be a button. Let me try to like I can have a text. A text has a non-select property, so I can
Okay.
trigger stuff from a text. I can trigger stuff from almost anything, right? But yeah, I'm trying to understand the context of the question because are you trying to ask if you can do like an automated trigger?
No, I was just thinking of other ways, like you've explained, you said you can do it from unselect on a text. I was just trying to
Yeah.
see, are there other ways to trigger or to start an
Okay.
action on a canvas
Yeah.
besides a button?
Yeah. So it's through a user action anyway. However, the user does that action is not, is not prescribed. So depending on what you're doing, and it doesn't have to be just one step. So it could be several things happening. So you could still put a semicolon, do other stuff, right? So this could just be one of the things that is being done when this button is clicked. Okay, so now if I click on this and I put this guy, still failing. So it says send an email, blah blah blah, failed, bad gateway, inner error, this server, blah blah blah. These errors don't make sense. Now sometimes, let's see, sometimes you might need to let me try and remove it and add it again. Because the flow itself didn't fail, except it does. Yeah, the flow itself is running fine. Okay, okay, okay. I think because of this run after is a bit confused. Let's see what is running after. So let's see, is run after. Oh, I understand why it's confused. So it's trying to run after when both of them are successful. Do you get?
Yeah.
But that doesn't make sense because if this one is successful, this one is not successful, you get. So that makes a bit of sense. So what we can do is just drag it to this side. So it's going to run only if this one is successful. So we should be fine. And another thing, when you have a flow triggered from an app, as much as possible, try to edit it within the app instead of editing it like this.
Mm.
Because or you can edit it outside, but you might find yourself having to remove it and add it again. It's not like it's not documented, if you get what I mean, but it's just something that I've seen happen. You could make some changes, but it's not reflecting, or especially when you're using connection references and stuff, it might not just catch on the way you expect it to. So if you see some weird errors that don't make sense, you can try to remove it and add it again, and a lot of times that works. So let's do this and click on the button, and now we see the ID just as we expect. So that is that. Let's see, what else do I want to say on this? Okay, so let's come back in here. So back to this flow interface, right? Let me refresh it to catch on the latest changes. All right, cool. One second. All right. Now, where are we? Where are we? All right, so I just wanted to mention a couple of other things. So you've seen how to copy and paste. So you just right click, copy action, right click, then paste. So you can either paste it as a direct action, or you can paste it as a parallel action. Now you know what that means. Some other things you can do is you can add notes. So if you want to add a note, maybe you've done some stuff and you just kind of like comment, right? So you can add a note and you just said, oh, this gets, oh, this creates the record, blah, blah, blah. Right. So you can add notes, and it's multi-line also. So that can really help you, document what's up with your flow. Maybe you've done something that is not so conventional. You can document that over there. And this new interface is a canvas. So so right now I'm holding down control on my keyboard, and I can zoom in and out. And you see we have the hand. So if I just click, I can pan around. So this one thing I like about this view, it allows you to be able to move around your flows very quickly, right? And you can just pan around, zoom in, zoom out, as you would want to. So let's see, is there any other special thing? Yeah, nothing too crazy. Nothing too crazy. I think the rest of it will just come from use cases. So as I said, I'm going to expand the work we are doing, the assignment work, into include some automation use cases. All right. Any question?
Not for now.
All right, cool. So coming in here, so just the way we've used SharePoint, you can also use Dataverse. So Dataverse also has triggers. It also has actions. So you can see some of the triggers when a row is added, when a row is selected, blah, blah, blah. Actions, you have different actions. Also, you can add rows, you can relate rows, blah, blah, blah. So now Dataverse has a bit of more granular conditions you can specify when you're triggering. So you can say, do when a row is added, right? Or you can say when it is added or deleted. Or you can say when it is added or modified, or added or modified or deleted, or when it is deleted, or when it is modified, or when it is modified or deleted, right? So you have those more granular options. For SharePoint is just when it is modified. So, and with Dataverse also, you can specify columns. So under the advanced properties, you can select columns. So say I've modified any column. So any column I choose here is will only trigger if I modify that column. Do you get? So is more granular. For SharePoint, when you have modified, it's modified. If any column is modified, it will trigger. But with Dataverse, you can specify what what column is being watched for the trigger. Do you get?
Yeah.
All right, cool. And in terms of the scope, also, you can also have a scope on the trigger such that, following the whole security rule setup. So if it's not my business unit, maybe it doesn't concern me and it doesn't need to be triggered, right? So you can scope it to user level, business unit level, organization level based on your hierarchy that has been set up. From a lot of cases I do is organization, but it's also possible. So if you see organization trigger for all roles, the user has read access to on that table, is within the context of the selected table. For business units, it only triggers for roles that the user has read access to in the same business unit. So basically, we could have, so maybe I say when a role is modified, right? But the role that was modified is not a role that I have access to, then that's not going to trigger for me. Do you get? That's not going to trigger within that context. So those are different scopes you can have there. And as I said, for the column here, this will only trigger when any of these columns are updated. Okay. And you can also do a filter. You can say, okay, you want only rows where the status code is equal to 1 to be affected by this. So you have those kind of flexibilities when dealing with Dataverse. When you're querying data, so you're trying to get data, we have something called OData filter, which we are going to do. I think that's something we should and must do because it's very important. So I'll get to that. And you can have expressions. You can use expressions. We've seen dynamic content. So I think next we're just going to look at OData filter and expressions. We'll talk about expressions a little bit. Okay. But let's have a 10 minutes break and we some by one. Is that okay?
All right, that's cool.
Cheers. Hi, can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh yeah, so sorry, I totally got distracted.
No, wow. That's fine.
Okay. All right. So going on. Oh yeah, I think I said I was gonna show all data, right?
Yeah.
So when you are trying to query a database, let's use SharePoint again. Let's say we're sending an email response to Power Apps or Flow. Okay, so let's just do it after sending the email or before sending the email. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I
Hello,
can hear
hello.
you.
Yeah, so something that's come up for me, and I'm wondering what strategy should we do. It might take me about 30 minutes.
Okay.
Um, so do we wait or let's see, let me look at
You have to
the
do something a bit that might take you about 30 minutes.
yes.
You can close the class for the day. Oh.
Yeah, because that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking we can wrap it up. We're quite close to the end of Power Automate. What we're looking at for Power Automate. So yeah. Yeah, I think let's wrap it up there. Then we'll just pick it up when we continue, anyways. Then hopefully by then I've put together
The assignment.
the automation part of the assignment. Okay, that's fine. So just gather your question. I see you were playing with stuff, so yeah, continue doing that. And apart from going through the actual materials, one thing that this engagement is useful for is answering questions. Do you get
Yeah,
so? And you really get better questions when you're actually trying it out. So yeah, do more of that. Okay, no
sure.
worries, Farid. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for
And
today.
yeah, no, we'll catch up later.
No problem. You too. Have a
Okay,
lovely week. Bye.
bye. You too. Cheers.